the BankTalk podcast, the show where we talk to leaders and experts from the community banking sector. Whether you are a current CEO or aspire to be one, this podcast will give you valuable insights and advice on how to run your financial institution better. Each episode features a different topic and a guest who shares their experience and knowledge with us. Tune in and learn something new with BankTalk podcast.
Hi, welcome to BankTalk. This is Rich Carty, Sales Executive with Remedy Consulting. Today we have a great episode focusing on the next-gen core systems. We'll be talking to Charlie Kelly on a couple recent deals we've seen involving the next-gen core system. And we've had other groups at events and questions just surrounding that topic. So let's dive in and talk through what we're seeing and what makes sense. Hope you enjoy.
Hey, Rich, thanks for having me. Appreciate you. It's kind of weird to be on this side of the interview desk.
Well, I'm sure everyone appreciates you joining and answering some of the questions of what we've been seeing. So again, thanks for your time, and I'm sure everyone will appreciate it as well. I think what we want to talk about a little bit more is some things you've learned with signing a contract, migrating over to a new generation core system. Some followers may not be as familiar with this concept. When I've looked through some articles and heard certain terms or promises with certain maybe, sexy type words like cloud native or digital first, application programming, interface environments. If you were, a leader at a bank, again, they might think that's a sexy term and say, I should try to get one of those. So why don't you maybe dive into that a little bit and kick us off with what we'd be talking about here?
Sure. Yeah. Rich, well, you and I just went through one of these, right? So I guess the use case I could think of is we have a meeting with a bank and we're like, okay, let's talk about what you're doing with your core. Are you going to stay? Are you going to go? You can try to find a new one. And one thing that pops out of the CEO's mouth a lot of times is maybe I should be looking at one of these next gen cores. And a next gen core, best way I could describe it is this. A couple years ago, a few cores started up. You think of like a Nimbus, maybe a Finxact. There's a bunch of other names, but their goal was to replace the legacy cores. And legacy cores, obviously, if you're in this industry, you know that the big three are Fiserv, FIS, Jack Henry, and then it sort of goes down from there as far as number of banks that have one of these core systems. So anyhow, these startups come along. They're like, okay, if we could do this differently, what would we do? And I think if I just break those terms down that you use, the theory, they would build this thing on a Microsoft Azure, or they would maybe an AWS. So they would build it without hardware. They would build it with rented hardware, for lack of a better term. So it would be cloud capable, digital first. I don't always know what that term means in our industry, but I would say digital first probably means that it's, in general, their goal was to try to connect to digital capacity, right? So whether that be bill payment, whether that be online banking, whether that be mobile banking, right? Their goal was to say the core would lead with the digital. Now, if you back into that, I think what some of their customers are learning is probably they weren't really centering on the user experience. They were centering on the connectivity.
Okay.
And then application program interface friendly environment, right? Which is, a lot of words, but what that means is basically, these things were built to be connectors, right? So if you could build the ability to connect to anybody, any fintech anywhere, right? Then that would make it application friendly, API friendly, for lack of a better term. So that's kind of, I'm not sure if that breaks it down enough for you, but in my head, when I think of what they were trying to get and what they were trying to build, it does feel sexy. It is different. It is a different concept, and it is kind of bleeding edge, right? If you can make it work. So that's the way I would sort of interpret what these next generation cores were going after and still continue to go after.
Gotcha. I think that's a good overview of what it looks like, and it could be a glimpse into what the future looks like for different FIs and where people may want to dip their toes in. I know I think of it almost like my wife when she had an eye procedure, LASIK, and she didn't want to be the first to do it, but also wanted to get recommendations of how did it go for people and who she might work through. A little bit different.
Make sure nobody's blind at the end of it. That kind of thing. Probably right.
Exactly. That the eyesight actually improves, but it might be a little scary at first. But I think, is there, generally speaking, to you on your side, do you think there's a benefit to it, and who would be the people that might want to be looking at that to start?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great analogy. Right, the eyesight thing is a perfect analogy, because when you look at it, you go, all right, I got to wade in. I can't just jump in with both feet. This is my eyesight, right? I think the bankers probably think of it the same way. This is my core. This runs my business. So if we jump in with both feet, we better make sure that we've got our T's crossed and I's dotted at a minimum, right? We want to ask for references. There's a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that just because this new core says it's going to do this, that it will, right? So that's kind of item number one. Item number two, to kind of directly answer your question, is who are the candidates? I think it is, we've only had a couple of our customers at Remedy that have, after doing their due diligence, have jumped in and said, we're going to go down this path, right? Most of those are community banks, so they're not a regional bank size; they're a community bank size, and the use cases that I have, they have said, I'm not going to just take all of my customers and migrate them to this new core. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build a digital only bank, right? A bank outside my footprint with maybe a different name on it that is digital only. So I don't need brick and mortar. I just need people to come to the site, right? And then their goal would be to eventually, if that site works the way they want it to for true banking purposes, grab all their customers and migrate off of their current legacy core to the other core. Now, smaller banks, I think, are kind of taking that model. They're sort of taking a let's wait and see approach to it. I think there are larger banks that have decided, okay, we're going to try this. And if I were to kind of profile them, I would say these are folks that probably have a development team available to help rewrite APIs, to help patch up things that aren't working perfectly or that don't work the way they do today. And there's somebody who is really frustrated, and I think you could probably say the community banks are really frustrated as well with these legacy cores because of support. If you know the space and you're a CEO or a COO, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? It's
Sure.
Lack of support, it's lack of love, right? And It is nickel and diming for every system they connect to, they want to get paid for, and those types of behaviors. Well, if you only have three choices, the fourth choice can look really good, right? even if that fourth choice might be a little bit of smoke and mirrors today.
Right. I guess a quick question that pops up in my head, we talk about who might be looking for it. In terms of the pricing, just a super high level overview. Typically, you buy technology up front, it's going to be a little bit more expensive. Do you think for people who might be dipping their toes in to start with a product like this or on these new gen cores, are they going to get a little bit of a discount to start, or what have you seen there?
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? So we did a little bit of analysis on these customers, just because you'd think it would be exactly like that. You would think it would be cheaper because it's new, and cheaper because they need customers, right? The unique thing about them, when you do a deep dive, you realize that the functionality that people have come to expect out of legacy cores is not there yet with these customers. And I'll give you the best example I can give you is this. One of these cores doesn't even have a teller and a new account system. Most of them I don't think do. Well, teller and new accounts sort of runs at least the brick and mortar branches these days, right? You have to be able to start a new account. You have to be able to take a transaction, right? I mean, so you have teller functions that just have to happen when somebody walks into your bank, right? Well, some of these systems did not anticipate that because they were working on the API side of it. So that's functionality that's pretty critical, but sort of missing, right? And I guess what I would say is when we looked at the dollars, once you peeled off the functionality that wasn't there, it wasn't significantly cheaper. It was actually kind of on par for what the legacy folks were charging.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then the other thing is, in some cases, they were asking for folks to sign on before implementation started. Right. So, and that's pretty typical, right? You get some one-time fees, but for them to ask for recurring fees with a target date of we'll get you on the system, in 12 months, and then the 12 months doesn't occur and you still have to pay. I mean, I hadn't seen that model before, but the ones that I think are so frustrated with the legacy cores are signing some contracts that probably you wouldn't have with the legacy core.
Yeah. Oh, that's good insight. And I mean, obviously with your experience, and I guess your opinion wise, is the next gen cores gaining ground? And you talked a little bit about some of the size banks that might migrate to the next gen core, but if you want to elaborate a little bit more, gaining ground on the legacy cores, I guess.
We'll be right back.
Is your technology spend getting a little out of hand? Are you worried about making those big strategic moves because of those hefty vendor contracts? Or maybe you just feel like your technology is currently holding you back. In today's banking world, overspending on technology is a risk you just can't take. Going up against those major vendors on your own can be tough, expensive, and especially when the contracts are designed to benefit them. That's where Remedy can come in. Remedy Consulting helps our clients stay competitive and grow their business with the right technology, products, and their spending strategies. Not a Remedy client yet? Head on over to remedyconsult.net for a free review of your tech stack, spending, and contract terms. Even if you're not the perfect fit, you'll walk away with expert advice and confidence in your technology decisions. Check us out at remedyconsult.net or give us a call at 262-955-7776. Thanks for tuning in, and now let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, and I would say they are and they will, right? They are and they will. If you were asking me my opinion, I would say I don't know that any of these is ready for prime time for a community bank. Right now, they might be ready for prime time for a digital experiment or a digital only bank where you don't need some of the back office functions or you need a limited general ledger account, right?
Yeah.
If any words I'm saying are resonating with anybody, I would say you just make sure before you jump into it that you know what your customers, that there's another customer. Well, kind of go back to your eye analogy, right? Make sure you're not the first one to get LASIK, right? Because, or if you do, make sure that you're not putting too much risk around it, that if you walk out of there, you can still see something, right?
Right. Yeah.
So I would say we're not ready for prime time is probably the way I would categorize them right now for a community bank.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So contractually, how would you maybe recommend doing this, or maybe what not to do from what we've seen here at Remedy so far, and obviously yourself?
Yeah, so I would say this. I'll make the assumption that most of the customers that are looking at these things are going with this digital route, meaning they're going to keep their legacy core on one side, and then they're going to try this for their digital only bank. Outside their footprint, whatever this is.
Yeah.
This is the bank with another name, a bank of another name, right? So they're using that to build up deposits, let's say.
Sure.
I think there's a couple of things contractually that we bumped into that I wasn't expecting, and that were a lot harder with the legacy core. So what this, to kind of give you the use case, the customer, this particular one had a relationship with the legacy core, and he's trying to sign an extension contract with that core while also signing for this other core, right? And the other core would be, again, his digital only bank. First thing he ran into, like a wall, right, for lack of a better way to put that, was exclusivity. Okay, so exclusivity is built into a lot of these legacy contracts, and probably honestly should be built into everybody's contract. But what exclusivity in a contract means is, if Rich has 10,000 customers and Rich signs up for my system, I want all 10,000 customers. If I provide him credits or do some special things to get all 10,000 customers. I don't want half of those customers going away in the middle of the contract, right?
Right.
So exclusivity basically says you keep them here, right? And what that, the big picture value of that, well, you can probably tell what the value is to the legacy core. They keep their money, right? But the value for anybody is now you're not running dual systems, right? You don't have two GLs. You don't have conflicting data and all the things that might happen if you're moving customers between systems, right? Yeah. So historically, right, contractually, people have tried to get out of that thing, the exclusivity clause. And it is usually by doing something like this. They want to start a digital bank. They want to start something where they have a one-off where maybe ACH transactions are running a different way than the rest of the system. And historically, they've really held their ground. And in this case, with this customer, they were holding their ground saying, we might allow you to start a new bank, but we're not going to allow you to migrate our customers off, right? Without the normal penalties and things that go away with that. So I would say exclusivity, if I'm going to, there's too many things to talk about in this podcast, but I'll use exclusivity as one that you should pay attention to, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other one, and it's a sort of a subtlety of the same thing, but when you start talking about migration costs, right? Whether that is migration from the legacy over to this system, to this new system. If you're just moving from Fiserv to Jack Henry, Fiserv is going to charge you, and so is Jack Henry, right? Jack Henry is going to charge you to convert, and Fiserv is going to charge you to deconvert. In a system where you might migrate over time, or where maybe the entire system is not available, that migration might occur in chunks. It might not occur on the same day. And there are a lot of implications that go with half a migration, right? So as you start thinking about, I'm living on system A, I'm going to build system B, and then migrate from system A, migrate customers off A onto B, you better spend a lot of time thinking about what that looks like. And then, of course, contractually, make sure the contracts don't overlap, make sure that you got exclusivity out of the way, and those types of things. It was a unique experience in how hard it got fought on both sides, both the new core and the old core.
Yeah.
On, when those customers came over and what that was going to cost the customer. And there was, don't walk away from $1 million, right? These are $1 million decisions. To me, the complexities of the contract were pretty hard fought in order to get that thing done.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about the migration and deconversion type fees. They're battling themselves, which that must have been a fun conversation to go back and forth with.
Yeah, it's complicated if you're just, like I said, if you're just moving from A to B and everything moves at the same time. That's complicated, right? That's hard enough. You want to think about those things when you're negotiating a contract well before you have to make it happen, right? Yeah. If you're going to be an acquirer and you're acquiring clients, you want to make sure that you don't get stung every time. But in this scenario where you're kind of saying some of my clients stay on A and some stay on B, it just becomes that much more gooey, right? It's just harder to unravel and harder to get organized and all that kind of thing.
Yep.
So that, those are two things. Number three, I think I already talked about, which is be careful that you're not paying for something that you're not getting, right? Like, don't sign a contract that says I'm paying you by the month when I don't know that your system works, right?
Right.
This customer did paint himself into a bit of a corner, and now it wasn't bothering him because he felt like it was going to lead towards production eventually. It was in sort of test or QA or whatever, and it would be production available. Right. So he felt like he was making traction, but I don't know. Nobody ever pays me for doing nothing. So,
right. And who knows if that's 6 months, a year, or 5 years down the road.
Yeah, and in this guy's case, I think it was at least a 2-year delay. Okay. So he had been 2 years before, and he was still maybe 6 months to a year out before he'd be able to migrate.
It's a significant amount of time.
Yeah, if you're paying as much as he was per month, yeah, that was a very significant amount of time and a lot of money spent, right?
Right.
While in QA, right, or whatever, while in your quality assurance system, not the production system.
Well, I think that's pretty good insight. Is there anything else that maybe I didn't ask, or anything else you can kind of see for the future, or anything else you learned?
Honestly, it's kind of the unspoken things, right? And let me give you an example of what I mean there. Well, I asked this customer, the one that had the hardest time getting through the contract, if he would do this podcast for us, right? Like, I'm not the expert here. Although the client's got a lot more technical knowledge by far than I have of what he went through. I have the contractual knowledge because I went through that part of it with him. And his answer was no. Right. and so I'm like, okay, I mean, it's not like the first time it's ever happened in podcast world, but usually you think about it a little bit and you say, okay, what's their motivation for joining us and telling us their story, and then what's their demotivation, right?
Yeah.
And he put it very succinctly and bluntly, and he said it this way. He said, I don't really get much out of teaching other bankers what I've learned. Matter of fact, most bankers think of themselves as competitive, and they don't want to teach the enemy, right? Or whatever.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So that was item number one. And then he said, but more importantly, he said, if I get on that podcast, they can look me up. They can pretty quickly find out, which cores I'm dealing with, because it's pretty easy to find on the internet these days.
Yeah.
And then I've burned a whole bunch of bridges with both vendors, right? And not by design, right? Just because I'm going to say some things that are true and accurate and will not be in the best of light. What I would say is, the fact that he did not want to come on speaks volumes, right? To me, if I read between the lines, that says, so far, I spent a whole lot of money on something I'm not getting a lot of value out of, right?
Right.
Like, that might be a negative attitude. It might be a negative approach to it. But if I could get him to speak honestly, I don't know that he would said much different than that. Yeah. Now, this guy's a community banker. He's not a regional. He's not $15 billion, $30 billion in assets. He's a community banker, and he's a very cutting edge guy. So he believes in the project 100%. But I don't know that he knew the frustration of waiting for things to be accomplished. And like the example I gave before, which is, there's no teller system. I got to get a teller system. I got to get a new account system. The digital system I was going to pick doesn't work that well with this thing. I mean, they both speak through an API, but it doesn't really work. Those types of learning experiences are to me, if you say, hey, what didn't we talk about? It's the learning curve. And I can't get anybody to that learning curve because I don't have it, right? My client does. And he's not saying much. I don't know. Maybe that was a roundabout way of saying you learn from others, right?
Yeah.
And I just think it's hard to have the experience. Like, if you're going at this thing 2 feet in because you're that angry at your legacy core, you got to realize the legacy core's got 30 million lines of code in there. A new core is not going to be able to just duplicate that tomorrow.
Right.
So you're getting a beta product, and you got to just make sure you know what beta means in that sentence, right? But where the holes are, where the gaps are. And they're not going to tell you. Their references probably won't tell you. If you do reference checks on them, you've got to go ask some very, very specific questions that you might not be comfortable asking, and ask them. Believe me when I say ask them, it'll be worth it to you as far as whether to pull the trigger on this type of thing.
Yeah, I don't think the conversations will be going away. There'll be more terms that probably come up that you can hopefully define for us moving forward down the road. But yeah, I think exactly what you're saying. It's important to get people's input and see their experiences, and maybe not on the podcast level, but I think that it's great information.
Yeah, and I mean, I fully believe that this is a good idea, right? Like, a new core is a good idea. The fact that it's sort of API centered, I think it's a great idea. Like, I think that is going to free some things up that sort of these three legacies have had a stranglehold on for years. Like, I think the theory is good. I just think it's a bit early. And as they mature, you hope that they can, I don't think they're going to be out of the box necessarily, right? Like, we always called, when I worked at one of these legacy cores, we kind of said, hey, is this an out of the box system? And what that meant was, can I pick it up, and if Rich owns a bank and Charlie owns a bank, can I give both the same version to Rich and to Charlie and make them 95% happy? Or, because the alternative was, I'm going to give 10% to Rich and another 10 to Charlie and let them build the other 80 or 90.
Right.
I would argue that these things are, at least for now, are built for the Lego enthusiast, right? The guy who can snap a bunch of things together.
Okay.
Right? I don't think they're built to just pick up, hand to somebody and say, go run with it. And that's all good. You look at Europe, and I think a lot of their banking systems are probably built this way because the APIs are more common there, and they don't kind of have a stranglehold of just a couple providers.
Okay.
So I think the future looks good. I just don't think I wouldn't recommend for one of my customers to go through this at this point.
Yep. We'll see where that goes, whether it's a year from now or what. But it's great to hear that they're innovation moving forward.
Absolutely.
Well, Charlie, thanks for the time today. I think it was a really good teaching episode, but let alone hearing some insight from case study or however you want to put that. But again, thanks for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm glad we could have this conversation because, like I said, I mean, we always say we don't know everything, but if we can give somebody a leg up, that's as much as we can do for the world. So I'm glad we had the chance to have this conversation because we get the question so often, right? We get the question from somebody who's heard the magical words, and just doesn't know what to do with them. And often it's a CEO who's not a technical person.
Right.
So if you're a CIO listening to this, maybe some of these things will help you, right? Some of these experiences will help you, educate the boss or what have you.
Oh yeah. Like we said, it's something we've been hearing at events and calls, and it won't be going away.
Absolutely.
All right.
Well, thanks, Rich.
Yeah. Thank you, Charlie. Well, thanks for joining us today on this episode regarding next-gen core systems. Hopefully you learned something new. If you do have other questions or would like to set up some time to talk through it with the team, feel free to reach out. You can email me directly, rcardy@remedyconsult.net. Otherwise, we'll see you for the next one. Keep on learning. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the BankTalk podcast brought to you by Remedy Consulting. If you have any critical feedback on next-gen cores or have any additional questions, please reach out to the Remedy team. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.